Chapter 10, The Institutional Shuffle. In 1970, I was largely unconscious of the battle being fought on a higher level for black survival by civil rights organizations. Black Panthers, United Slaves, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, Nation of Islam, African National Congress, and other black organizations in the United States and abroad. I was brain dead about the Soledad brothers, Huey P. Newton, Angela Davis, Nelson and Winnie Mandela, Malcolm X, Bobby Rush, Bunchy Carter, Bobby Seals, Martin Luther King Jr., and other black leaders. Soon, I was returned to Central Juvie, this time for suspicion of burglary and being under the influence of drugs. I had made the mistake of being intoxicated and running out of gas in a stolen car, and in a predominantly white area of Carson. While I was walking to the bus stop, the cops jacked me up for sticking out like a lone raisin in a bowl of rice. Before I knew it, I was back in the Central Juvenile Hall for less than 3 weeks, and then transferred to another facility called Los Padrinos. The staff at Central Juvie had mentioned that I was being moved because I lived in the geographical jurisdiction of Los Padrinos. But my mother said, "Boy, these people didn't want you there because you acted like a fool." As it turned out, Los Padrinos was the Marriott Hotel of juvenile halls with a swimming pool, clean rooms, and food that was gourmet compared to Central's food. There were numerous peacocks strutting around with their plumage displayed and making shrieking noises sounding like a call for help. Help, help. Rumors had it that there was a donkey that enjoyed chasing people, but I never saw it. The stoic judge had stated on the record, "In the interest of this court and for your welfare," he was looking at me, "I ordered you be sent to the Job Corps in Salt Lake City." During the long bus trip to Utah, I didn't have the faintest idea what to expect. When the bus pulled up and I got off, there were 20 or more youths loitering inside the terminal. About half an hour later, there was a broadcast message requesting that all Job Corps recruits report to the bus outside. As far as I was concerned, when the bus turned onto the grounds, resembling an old army compound, I thought the judge had tricked me into enlisting in the armed forces. After being briefed on the rules and regulations, we, new arrivals, were assigned to living quarters in a quasi-army barracks. Like juvie, there wasn't much privacy, only a wooden style partition separating each bunk. In front of the large school building was a huge cannon, and across the street was the cafeteria. On campus was a wide spectrum of black youths like me, the descendants, as far as I was concerned, of a slave diaspora throughout the North, Central, and South Americas of the Western Hemisphere. Though all of us were of the same genotypical black ancestry, many of them were Puerto Ricans, spoke with a Spanish accent, and seemed standoffish towards us, their dark counterparts. The racial tension was evident, with the contemptuous stares and a better than snobbery despite our common poverty, fatherless, homeless lives, and not owning a pot to piss in. It was a landmine of racial intolerance between blacks and Puerto Ricans that had been brewing for God knows how long. Although I had no interest whatsoever in the Job Corps educational system, the archery program was something different. I discovered that I enjoyed it. To stand and aim an arrow at a target attached to a haystack evoked some ancestral hunting desire. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught the sight of a guy sitting on top of my leather coat. I asked him to put the coat on the back of the chair and continue to shoot at the target. When I turned back around, the guy was still sitting on my coat, so I walked over and asked him again. I thought perhaps he didn't understand English. Though he was Puerto Rican and may not have understood English that well, his dictation was impeccable when he said, "Shut up, ninja." That was the first time I had ever used my foot in a fight, and I didn't even know karate. The gym coach broke up the one-sided fight and marched me into the principal's office. The principal admonished me for my behavior and never asked what had happened. After some time, he told me to go to lunch and return afterward to continue the discussion about my incorrigible behavior. Heading toward the cafeteria, I noticed two large groups squared off, blacks standing next to the cannon and Puerto Ricans standing across the street. As I cautiously walked toward them, an older black youth with an alarmed expression met me, stating that the Puerto Rican guy I sucker punched and stomped wanted to fight me. Standing in the middle of the street facing my opponent, I was confident until I caught sight of a shiny object flashing in his hand, slightly behind his back. Had not the sun been blazing that day, I would have missed the glint and walked right into a sharp blade. I was able to unloosen my belt and then wrap it around my hand with the thick buckle dangling by my side. In Spanish, his Puerto Rican compadres were egging him on to attack as their warlike chants of "Get that ninja" resonated loudly. The sheepish silence on the part of the black group was a powerful signal suggesting, "You're on your own, brother." There's no telling what might have taken place had not the campus guards rushed in between us to end the drama. Oddly enough, that's when the Puerto Rican exploded and started yelling, "I'm gonna kill that ninja." Several guards had to hold him while I was escorted to the campus jail, a place I didn't know existed until that moment. Being behind bars was a circumstance to which I never had become accustomed. The walls were closing in on me when the principal showed up, babbling excitedly about there being a possible racial riot and about my being dishonorably discharged, which I knew meant going home. According to the principal, before my arrival, there was racial harmony on the campus and everybody got along. Having to shoulder the blame for everything was commonplace for me. No doubt the other guy was allowed to stay and graduate with honors. That evening, the campus guard drove me to the bus depot, handed me a bus ticket and $10 and said my leather coat would be mailed to me. When I arrived back in Los Angeles on my mother's doorstep, she simply shook her head, mumbling, "Oh Lord." It was no surprise that the juvenile court judge didn't contact my mother and ordered me back to the courtroom. And since we weren't contacted, I went back to Washington High. Nothing had changed. The gangs were still seeking to make examples out of me and others for defying their fiefdom over the school and neighborhood. Personally, I was tired of seeing the labyrinth of gang members' territories where safe passage required sidewalk tariffs. Else, a passerby would feel the gang's members' wrath. By now, most of my homeboys were expert car thieves. We used the cars to impress young women and to track down Sportsman Park boys who hung out at their park, what is now called Jesse Owens Park, and beat them down. One night, we were out cruising in a stolen 1963 Chevy looking for the Sportsman boys. We stopped in Inglewood to get loaded while Bub and Adam argued about who should be driving. Adam tricked Bub to get out and come around to the driver's side, then locked him outside. They continued to banter until the Inglewood police drove up, and we scattered in different directions. After jumping through the car's back windows, I climbed a tall wooden fence, fell into some thorny bushes, and rolled into a mud puddle. I jumped up, ran past the Doberman Pinscher, and hopped another fence. On the other side of the block, there was a crowd of teenagers in a driveway having a get-together, and I joined in. Trying to look inconspicuous, I stood there for more than 20 minutes, thinking the coast was clear and that Bub and Adam had probably gotten themselves busted. When I reached the corner, several white Inglewood police cars crept up with their lights out. Guns drawn, the cops ordered me to hit the dirt. I dropped to my knees and lay flat on the ground while I was searched and handcuffed. Back in Central Juvenile Hall, two detectives showed up to question me about the names of my two homeboys who'd eluded capture. One of the white detectives said, "Look, Stan, if you tell us who was with you in that stolen car, you can go home today." I could not snitch under any circumstances, even if I were being accused of heinous crimes that others had committed. I was taught not to tell. As a little boy, I remember vividly how Big Rock used to be enraged when he talked about snitches being the lowest form of any animal. He said, "Better for a mother to cross her legs during the moment of conception to choke the life out of that child than to give birth to a snitch." When the cops asked again, was I willing to give the names of my homeboys, I said, "What homeboys? What stolen car?" Apparently, I pissed the cops off because they jumped up and stormed out of the room. Later that week, I was transferred to the Los Padrinos, from which I could spend the next 3 months going back and forth to court. While kicking back, minding my own thoughts, the Los Padrinos gym coach approached me and wanted to know if I was interested in lifting weights. I thought the muscular Caucasian coach was crazy and told him so. After about a week, the coach asked again if I was willing to lift weights. I said, "Lift weights for what?" My response was a mistake because the man launched into a lengthy monologue about health, muscle body parts, vitamins, protein supplements, bodybuilding shows, and weightlifting routines. I was eager to try the weights just to shut him up. His persistence in showing me how to back arm, curl, bench press, and do pullovers began to pay off big time. Later that day, though sore, I felt good. The more I began to lift weights, the more I became addicted to the feeling of being bigger and stronger. I can still hear the coach's words. "You have the body and bone structure to be enormous if you continue to drive iron and eat properly." Of course, I didn't believe a word he said, but he was able to motivate me to continue lifting weights. For me to find the raw power I never knew existed within me was a significant discovery. This was a discipline I could relate to and one in which I could see rapid results. Meanwhile, the court judge had sentenced me to Camp Rocky, located in the mountains above San Dimas, California. Rocky was a firefighting facility with no barbed wire fences or guard towers, and there was nothing between me and distance but air. A few times I thought about escaping, but figured doing time there would be a cakewalk. To me, Rocky was just another form of punishment I neither feared nor respected. With each incarceration, there were no life lessons learned. I simply entered into nothing, then was released, having been refined into bitterness and misdirection to slip further toward ruin. Camp Rocky would prove to be no different than juvie and the Job Corps. It didn't surprise me to see a peculiar alliance between the whites and Mexicans at Rocky, because I had noticed it first in juvie. Whenever a fight broke out between a black youth and a white youth, the Mexicans, instead of being neutral, sided with the whites. It was odd because those same whites could not walk down the street in any barrio without being attacked. I had stumbled into another hotbed of unrest based on skin color. There was a lot of backstabbing, not with knives, but with racial epithets ping-ponging through the air. "You white devils, you wetbacks, you ninjas." Most of the battles were verbal, but fistfights broke out here and there. I did manage to befriend some blacks from Los Angeles, including Tick, Anthony, Harper, Bobo, and others who would become part of my circle. All of us slept in a huge dorm with steel bunks lined up on both sides of a slightly elevated control center, where a counselor stood vigil over us. At night, everybody kept a watchful eye out for possible rat packing. Blankets would be thrown over a sleeping victim's head, and then he'd be beaten senseless. Though I'd only seen whites and Mexicans rat pack the weaker ones among themselves, I still remained vigilant. I slept far in the back in a bunk next to the wall where I could see everything coming and going. The notion of sleeping with one eye open applied here, but it was next to impossible to perform effectively. I did become a light sleeper, however, and my ears were as sensitive to movement as a bat's built-in echolocation system. Each morning, the camp program began with our getting up at about 6 a.m. and washing up, then meeting outside around the flagpole. There, a counselor would inspect our faces for any signs of facial hair. No youth was allowed to eat breakfast unless he was clean-shaven and washed up. After breakfast, we dressed in firefighting gear and went out in a truck that seemed to stop randomly anywhere on the side of a mountain for us to work. We were handed tools to fire break certain sections, hard labor for a measly 25 cents per day and 15 cents. We were handed tools to fire break certain sections, hard labor for a measly 25 cents per day and 50 cents for working at an actual fire site. But I managed to get a position working in the kitchen, where I eventually became the head cook. Most of my time was spent cooking and driving iron. In a short period, I had buffed up my 14-inch arms to 17 inches. I was walking around with my chest raised up, arms stuck out to the side, and I strolled with my feet outward. I didn't care how my stroll looked to others. I thought it made me look tough, and it felt right. When I turned 17 on December 29, 1970, there was no doubt I was bigger and stronger, but I lacked the necessary discipline to stay out of juvenile correctional facilities. Though I look forward to returning to the streets, my thoughts focused on countermeasures to conquer neighboring gang menaces. No longer would my friends, relatives, or I be subjected to fear of bodily harm. No more wanting the so-called enemy. I would be the seek and destroy, attack, and attack again. This was war. Prior to my release date, I was summoned for a reevaluation and customary procedure for every youth. Seated inside the gymnasium before the staff's tribunal, I was subjected to a long list of questions. The last question was fair enough. Stan, what are your plans once you're released back out into society? With an indifferent expression, I replied, I plan on being the leader of the biggest gang in the world. My unrehearsed response was as shocking to me as it was to them. It was as if a ventriloquist had unexpectedly spoken the truth through me. The very thought of joining a gang or being the leader of one was preposterous. I hated street gangs. I guess the counselors viewed my statement as being unrealistic as I did. It was probably the first time the counselors had been left speechless. While they sat there befuddled, I waltzed out and slammed the chair behind me with an emphasis of a kick. One thing for sure, they were tired of me being there. For the first 8 weeks, I had given the staff hell. 2 days later, Fred and my mother picked me up, and as we drove off, I didn't even look back.